be able to answer them. So I'll put them to him at the end. So what I'll do, I'll hand over to you now, Michael, to get going. Oh, just before we get going, actually, if you have any questions, please post them in the question tab, which is on the right-hand side of the webinar software. And yeah, I'll put them to Michael at the end. So yeah, I'll hand over to you, and yeah, I'll stay on the line and be muted.
Perfect. All right, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for joining this webinar this afternoon. Good afternoon. And well, the topic of our webinar today is integrated drug safety risk management. I did not want to talk about anything very operational, but I thought it might be a good idea, also in preparation of the teaching course that we are planning in October, to set the stage a little bit for some more, well, higher level thinking about drug safety risk management. Risk management, if you think about it, is independent of the industry that we're talking about. It's always the same process. You want to identify what can go wrong. You want to identify the hazards that are associated with processes or products. Then you want to find out if something goes wrong, how bad is it, how frequently does it happen? That's the process of hazard or risk analysis. And then, well, you want to do something about it, right? You want to find out, well, what does it mean? What does it mean if something goes wrong? That's the process of risk assessment. And how do you improve it? That's the actual risk management or risk minimization. So I've deliberately chosen two pictures here as examples for risks that have not been controlled well. On top, where you see the crater, that's where the biggest non-nuclear explosion in the world took place in 1921, when a few hundred tons of ammonium nitrate blew up in Oppau on the River Rhine. You see the Rhine in the back. This is in Germany. If you think about the map of Europe, Oppau is very close to Basel, between Switzerland, between the Swiss border and Frankfurt. That explosion blew up this site, and it could be heard all the way to London. Below, you see another very famous incident, Flixborough, 1974 in the UK, where a 60 cubic meter tank of N-hexane blew up because of lack of proper change management controls. I don't want to go into details here, but in both cases, what went wrong was that people knew about the hazards, they knew what could go wrong, they knew that they were dealing with highly flammable or explosive substances, but they did not adjust the processes accordingly. So they knew the hazards, but they had not really assessed the risks, and for sure, they had not implemented proper risk management tools. Now, if you think about risk management, that used to be a very iterative approach. If you think about the aerospace industry, airplanes were basically developed in a fly, fix, fly approach. You would build an airplane, you would fly it, eventually a plane would crash for whatever reason, and you would improve the design of your plane and have a new one. Now, this is a way of moving forward, right? You gradually increase the airplanes, however, at a tremendous cost of material and human life. So eventually, the aerospace industry decided that this is not the way forward, and they implemented a system safety. So they implemented risk analysis methodologies. And nowadays, when you get on an aircraft, if you think, for example, the new Airbus A380 or the Boeing Superliner or Dreamliner, sorry, every single piece there has been subjected to the failure modes and effects analysis. So all the risks that could come from a failure in one of the pieces has been analyzed, and this has been formally documented, and risk minimization has been performed. Now, obviously, the aerospace industry is very much ahead of the game here compared to other industries, but as time goes on, other industries are improving and are certainly moving forward. We're going to discuss this a little bit later in more detail. Now, why do you want to manage risks? Obviously, you want to manage because you want to avoid some negative outcome. Now, if you think about how a risk comes about, you see that usually the risk consists of an underlying hazard or a vulnerability and some event, some trigger event that causes this hazard to result in an event, in an impactful event. And the event leads to some negative outcome. So if you think about it in other terms, you could say that because of the existence, or due to the existence of the hazard and the trigger coming together, this leads to an event that has a certain outcome that is impacting your property, your product, your process. And these risks, these outcomes, they can be classified in different ways. You may have direct damages. So if you, for example, if you think about explosions, these are physical damages. If you think about drug safety risks, you have adverse events. These are first order risks. Now, next to these first order risks, there are second order risks. These are consequential damages. For example, liability risks, right? If you cause a lot of harm with a drug, people will sue the company, and that will have a financial impact on the company. Now, these two order risks, first and second order risks, they are visible, they can be evaluated, and they can be insured. So there's a way of transferring this risk to another party. However, if you think further, there are higher order risks. So for example, if you have these first order and second order risks, they could, if they're not managed properly, they can lead to third and fourth order risks. The third order risks are those that are indirect losses arising from the first and second order risks. For example, image losses. Imagine if a company causes a lot of harm with an adverse event or adverse drug reaction, which leads to liability issues which are not handled properly or not handled well. Communication may not be optimal, which this may lead to a loss of in the image or negative image of the company. And ultimately, if this is then also not handled well, the risk may be deemed unacceptable to society, and the license to operate may be lost. Things that we've seen frequently when drugs cause inappropriate harm and have to be removed from the market. Now, these third and fourth order risks are very, very hard to evaluate beforehand, and they're very hard to manage. So if we want to manage risks that are really having a massive impact on the company, we have to manage them on the first and second level. You hear me say or use terms like risk and hazard. Now, hazard and risk both have meanings in different meanings in different categories and different fields. If you come from the epidemiology side, you will think of a hazard or a risk in a very different way. In terms of risk management, we are talking about hazards as unassessed loss potentials. We think about hazards as something that is a potential, something that could go wrong, something that could provide a root cause for an adverse outcome. Now, this hazard may be something negative, maybe something inherently dangerous, but it may also be an intended and inherent property or condition of a product. Imagine, for example, petrol. If you drive a car that's driven with petrol, petrol is an explosive liquid, right? If we engineer the explosivity or the flammability of petrol away, it will not propel our car anymore. Same holds for certain drugs. If you think about mitotic spindle inhibitors as oncology drugs, if you engineer their property of being teratogenic away, you don't have a drug anymore. So the hazard, the root cause for a negative outcome, may be inherent to the system. The risk then is the assessed loss potential. What happens if a hazard really emanates into a negative outcome at a certain probability of occurrence and at a certain severity of the outcome? And in the real world, the risk is a function of the probability and severity of the outcome. So what we want to do in risk analysis is we want to identify the hazard the potential trigger event that makes the hazard a risk, and then want to find out what is the probability of this happening and what is the severity of the consequences. So I'll give you a quick example just to illustrate what I mean here with this whole process in a completely non-drug related term. If you look at my masterpiece drawing here, we have a hill of say a height of 300 meters. Obviously, a hill in itself is not a hazard, right? Hills are there, there's nothing that can go wrong. Now, let's put a stone ball on top of this hill. The stone ball has a mass of 1 ton, sits there under gravitational control. Now, you could muse about whether this is now a hazard or not. Now, without longer ado, I tell you it's still not a hazard because it's just sitting there, right? Even if something happens, it's still sitting there. Nothing can go wrong. Even if it rolls down, well, who cares? It may be that the landscape doesn't look so nice anymore, but it's not in any way impacting anybody. However, if we now put a farmhouse next to this hill with the farmer and his family and the livestock, then we have a hazard. And the hazard is this complete description of the system. We have a farmhouse plus the inhabitants next to this hill with a stone ball under gravitational field. The farmer knows that this is dangerous and he put in a drainage system to prevent the landslide. So in this description, we have a description of a hazardous situation. Now, still, we don't know what could go wrong, right? It's not a risk yet. We just know it's a hazard. It's something that is potentially causing harm. So what could happen, of course, is there could be wind and rain together that weaken the soil, and the ball accelerates under the gravitational field and destroys the house and kills the farmer. So the question is this a risk? Well, it describes a risk almost completely. However, what we don't know yet is what is the probability of this event happening and what is the severity. How do we rank the consequences? But once we have done that, then we have described a risk. So please keep that in mind. And I think this is a very, very important concept, keeping in mind underlying risk factors, hazards, and outcomes. In risk management, independent of the industry, and this is of course also true for drug safety risk management, we want to manage the impact or the probability of the outcome. We cannot manage the underlying hazards. And this becomes especially important if we implement very costly and complicated risk minimization measures and want to show the effectiveness of that risk minimization measure. If we don't deal with outcomes, but with underlying hazards, we will never be able to show that we are effectively managing a risk. Keep that in mind. So if we think about this in terms of drug safety, for example, here are some other terms that we could use. For example, we have an inherent hazard, a drug A, that is prone to drug-drug interactions. So usually when drug A is co-administered with drug B, as you see in the upper right panel, you see that many of the factors that control the development of an adverse drug reaction will not align in an unfavorable way, and there won't be an adverse fail, all the risk factors align in a way, this will lead to the development of an adverse outcome. So as you can see here from this, it's called the Swiss cheese model, as you can see here, there's a certain probability of all these holes in the different barriers aligning in an unfavorable way. However, it's not happening all the time. So we have a certain probability of events happening. Keep that in mind. Risk is a function of probability and severity. Risk is also a variation around an outcome. If you play dice or any other gambling, then there's always one way to win and one to lose, and it's always around a variation around a certain outcome. So risk is not necessarily always just black and white, and risk very much from this from this little leopard cub on the right lower side associate with this picture. For example, you could think that there's a risk to the leopard cub that it could die, for example, because its mother left it. There's a risk to the photographer because the mother leopard may just stand behind the photographer and may not like it that he takes a photograph of the cub. So think about that when analyzing risks, when assessing probabilities and severities. Risk may look different for different people. The risk analysis process that I mentioned is a very important step in assessing and analyzing the risk, and especially in prioritizing risks. Independent of the methodology that you use, and there are many around, you always have, again, these 3 core steps that I mentioned at the beginning: identify, assess, and improve. You want to identify the hazards and assess how bad they are. Then you want to find out which are the really important risks. You want to rank them, and then you want to improve them. You want to address those risks that are really important. And that there are many different techniques around for this. I'm not going into details here, but obviously all the methodologies that are available are variations around this common 3 core process. In the risk analysis, you want to find out what can go wrong, where is the hazard, who is in control of the hazard, who is involved. You want to find out what is the trigger, how or why would this hazard become a risk. And then for the effect, you want to know how big is it, how bad is it, how much does it cost, how big is the impact. And then you rank all those. And eventually, if everything goes well, you can find or can rank your risks in a risk matrix. You may have seen these before. There are many like that around, many different ways. In a nutshell, if you look at one of those, like here, this the starting stage here, we have a certain area with increasing probability of a risk, increasing severity to the right. So we have an area which is red with very high severity, high probability, where the risks are that are unacceptable. Below that risk tolerance boundary here, we have the acceptable risks, those that we say, okay, well, they exist, but we don't necessarily have to manage them right away. And then, of course, if we want to improve our risks, we have to do something about them. So we can either try to eliminate those risks, like these 2 here, trying to eliminate those, and we have a couple of further risks that we need to deal with. Then we may have some where we want to reduce the impact, or where we want to reduce the impact or the severity, the probability of those risks. And ultimately, hopefully, we'll get all these risks with our risk minimization measures into an area where they are acceptable. And these risks we have to live with, right? If we minimize a risk, we still have it. It's not gone, right? If we have a risk of, say, malformations from a teratogenic drug, and we have an educational program that informs women of childbearing age that they should not take that drug, then the risk is still there, right? We have informed them. We may reduce the probability of the negative outcome, but we still have the risk. It's not gone. So we still have to monitor this risk and keep it under control. We also have to keep it under control because the aspects of the scope of our risk analysis can change. We may have a very different state of the art. For example, if in terms of benefit risk management, if you think about it, when you bring a new drug to the market and compare it to a placebo, and after, say, a couple of years, there are more drugs from the same class, you may have a very different comparator, and your comparative benefit risk profile may look very, very different. Of course, we know also that other aspects may change. For example, the risk tolerance of society. Society is not willing to accept many risks anymore that they used to accept earlier. So risk analysis and the whole risk landscape, the whole benefit risk profile has to be reviewed periodically to assure that all the risks are under control. This is a process. This is very much formalized nowadays in the form of the PSURs or PBRs, where a periodic reassessment of the benefit-risk profile of a drug has to take place. Risk management, in a way, is the management of differences between expectations and reality. You want to you apply wishful thinking about risks and about the situation and the severity and outcome of risks, and in reality things look different. So risk management tries to balance that. If you think about the development of risk management and think back a little bit to what I said before about fly, fix, fly to proactive risk management, you may think of an evolutionary process of risk management coming from a very regressive stage in which accidents simply happened and people accepted that accidents happened, to a reactive stage where if an accident happened, it would be investigated and then measures would be taken to avoid the same accident. That would be very much the fly, fix, fly approach, to a compliance culture where regulations are being put in place to prevent incidents before they occur. And then further on, to a proactive management of risks, where risks become, where risks get owners and become managed by their owners in a proactive way. All the way, if we go forward, to a resilient way of risk management, where risk management is a core business process, where we talk about integrated risk management. Now, if you think about different industries, I mentioned the aerospace industry before. The aerospace industry certainly is developed very, very far ahead, and it's certainly in the resilient stage. If you think about the pharmaceutical industry, I would say that in most cases we are somewhere in here in between compliant and proactive. And in the years since I started in drug safety, we've certainly moved further along here, and some companies may be quite advanced already in this stage. But by and large, I think we are still somewhere here in this border region. There are different ways of risk management: autonomous and integrated risk management. Autonomous meaning that a risk is pragmatically and sometimes very frequently also efficiently managed at the operational level where it occurs. However, this is not necessarily the best way of risk management, especially because it is uncoordinated, and the same risk may be managed in different ways at different levels. Compared to that, we have an integrated risk management approach where risks are treated coherently and reduced coherently. And this is more cost efficient and leads hopefully to also an improved risk awareness and better decision processes. However, it requires frameworks for risks. It requires very clear defined roles and responsibilities and processes and tools. Integrated risk management is a continuous process where risks are continuously identified, assessed, and improved. And then, of course, eventually also there's a step of evaluating how effectively the risk is managed, and also has something changed, and then the whole cycle starts again. As a very important point here, the integrated risk management approach bridges the gap between strategy, risk management strategy, and the tactical implementation. It focuses on the benefits and keeps the benefits in mind, which I think, especially in drug safety risk management, is extremely important, because ultimately without the benefit, without the drug benefit, we don't have a drug. If we also do it coherently and consistently, decision-making processes are improved and uncertainty can be managed much better. And of course, risks need to be taken sometimes. We cannot avoid them completely. It's very rare that we can completely eliminate a risk. So we have to have a certain basis upon which we are willing to accept a risk. And an integrated risk management approach allows for that, and helps us in developing a risk-mature culture that is resilient to risks. Importantly again, and as a real advantage of the integrated approach, risk knowledge must be shared, You see a couple of pictures here that represent a couple of very famous or infamous disasters, very negative outcomes, from banking to drugs to the Challenger catastrophe. In all these cases, risks were known. However, the knowledge about the risks didn't get to the right strategic level in time. And for real integrated risk management, the integration of both the tactical and the strategic approaches is crucial. There are many different barriers why this does not work in many companies, in many cultures. One very clear one is that there's no risk management champion. Nobody is responsible for the risk. Decisions are not being taken because nobody knows who takes the decisions. There are silos of analysis, silos of reporting. Communication is always an issue. And many different other organizational barriers. The frequent comments I've heard over the years in working in benefit risk management are some that are assembled here, like we need to focus on whatever somebody else does. I know what I'm doing, I don't write it down. This activity is part of our normal way, there is no risk. Let's not make that risk red, meaning let's not make that raise too much awareness about that risk. Somebody in top management may not like that. There's no risk. I'm still not confident about it. Why do I need to do this? We don't have any money anyway. This is not phase 3 development. We don't have any risks. My favorite one was that one. You are the risk manager. What are my risks? And this, of course, is not working. So what needs to be done in order to drive the development from a basic risk management culture to a resilient one is to have coherent approaches to all processes that are important for the management of drug safety risks. They start from signal detection, risk assessment, risk management planning and implementation, and the balancing of benefits and risks. Benefits and risks need to be communicated internally and externally, and a learning culture needs to be created in which all the functions in the organization learn about what does it mean to manage benefits and risks, which also includes that organizational and cultural barriers may have to be overcome. So this breaking up of silos is a really important step on the way to a resilient risk culture. And in some cases, it really works well to show the value of the change. If you manage to really positively influence an outcome, positively influence a benefit-risk balance of a drug, that this supports a common vision around integrated risk management. It's an effective bridge between strategic and tactical risk management levels, provides a link between those, and also manages opportunities. So sometimes keep that also in mind. Risks, as I said, are variations around an outcome, and if you manage a risk well, it may all of a sudden become an opportunity. Also, what I hear frequently and have heard over the years frequently is that risk management is slowing down the process. The development process takes a certain amount of time. We all know that. If you want to bring a drug to the market, everybody is under time pressure, and you don't want to spend time to sit down for a day or two to simply think about risks and balance benefits and risks. And for that, I really love that statement about race cars. If you want to drive really fast, you need good brakes, not in order to drive slower, but in order to be able to brake when the curve comes. So only if you have good brakes on a race car, you can go really fast. And risk management, in a way, are the brakes on a winning race car. Thank you very much. This was the presentation.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
If anyone has any questions, please post them in the question tab on the right-hand side of the screen. Just looking if we have any at the moment. 2 seconds. Okay, I've got a question here for you, Michael. How can we evaluate the success of managing a specific risk in RMP, for example, after distributing the DHCP letters?
Right. So for the evaluation of the effectiveness of the risk management measure, you have in principle two different ways. You can first try to find outcome parameters. You can try to find or define whether the outcome of interest is being influenced positively. So for example, if you have a negative outcome, some ADR that you want to avoid, and you distribute the DHPC letter, then you can measure after a year or maybe 2 years, whatever the time, a suitable time frame is, whether this outcome of interest has really become less frequent, right, or less severe. That's sometimes very difficult, especially if the only measure you have, the only way of measuring you have is spontaneous reporting, but it's possible. The other way of measuring success is by looking at process parameters. You implement a process and you want to show, okay, well, in principle, does my measure, my risk minimization measure really impact the behavior, for example. So if you distribute a DHPC letter with a certain information on the way of distributing or prescribing a drug, and then you go out after a couple of months and ask the physicians or the recipients of this letter, did you receive the letter? Has this had an impact on your prescribing behavior? Then you may be able to measure that as well. So you may be able to say, okay, well, we have implemented that. We have sent out the material, which is the first step, of course, and we can show that you've reached 100% of your target audience, and then you've sampled and you found out, okay, 80% of the physicians remember they have received the letter, and out of this 80%, another 80% have remembered that, and they do not prescribe the drug without previous lab tests, for example. So there are ways of doing it. The classical way, as I said, just measuring event rates in spontaneous reporting is certainly not the optimal way forward. Any further questions?
Sorry, I was on mute then. I was just reading out another question to you then, Michael.
Okay.
Are there standard quantitative methodologies to measure the benefit risk balance for a product, or they are mostly qualitative, or are they mostly qualitative?
Right. So most of the frameworks are qualitative, and in my experience over the last couple of years, there were some applications of quantitative methodologies, and this was mostly using multi-criteria decision analysis, but they were really just niche applications, and they helped to some extent in understanding the benefit risk profile in subpopulations or for very specialized applications. Most of the time, the benefit risk assessment is really qualitative and in the form of the different frameworks. Having said that, I've received the feedback from the PRAC at the EMA a couple of, well, maybe 1.5 years ago, that a quantitative approach was very useful in explaining why certain risks are more important than others, and why certain benefits also needed to be included in the framework.
Brilliant, thank you very much. We don't have any questions at the moment. I suppose, Michael, it might be a good opportunity to just maybe just give an overview of what the course will be about that you're delivering in Dubai later this year.
You're right. Yeah. So in the course, we are going to talk about the different core methodologies in pharmacovigilance, risk management planning, mostly about risk management planning, reporting on risks, the evaluation of benefit risk profiles, also the re-evaluation in the form of periodic safety update reports or PBRs, and how to document that and how to prepare for inspections. I think these were the key topics that we discussed about. that we will discuss at this course.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't think we have any other questions. I'm just going to give it 2 seconds just in case anyone is writing, frantically typing. Oh, when is the course happening? That's a really good question, and I was just trying to pull that up. Do you have the dates at hand, Michael?
No, unfortunately, no.
I'm just going to pull them up now, actually. Yeah. 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm. I believe it's October 15th to 17th, if I remember correctly, but I may be wrong.
Yes, it is. It's the 15th and 17th of October, and that's been held in Dubai. What I'll do actually is after this webinar, I will send a link to the recording to everyone who's attended, and also just a bit of information where they can find out more about the course if they wish to. And if they have any more questions on that, then they'll be able to find a number or email address. So that'll be distributed to everyone after.
Excellent.
I think that's it. So I don't have any more questions, Michael. So I'll leave it there. So thank you very much for everyone who's attended, and thank you very much to you, Michael, for delivering that presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
Yes, everyone have a good week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.